Hello guys, and welcome to part 2 of the Tic-Tac-Toe game in Pygame. So the last part we created the board class and we managed to draw the board also on the screen, so you should have something like this drawn on your screen, so those lines in there. Okay, so this is the board that we're working with. Okay, the next thing to do in here is going to be to create the icon class, so we can click. Once we click on the boards, we're going to draw those icons, either the X or the O on this screen. Okay, so let's go to our sprites class, our sprite file, and I'm just going to create this icon just at the top of the board. So I'm just going to give it myself a few spaces in there. Class, I'm just gonna call this icon. I don't even know what you call those. I guess it's an icon, right? And this one is gonna be very simple. So we're just gonna have a initializer here, so a constructor which will take an X and Y coordinate and the text. So this X and Y coordinates is whenever we click on the boards, those coordinates is gonna be passed in here, and then the text is either the X or the O. So depending if I'm playing, then it's gonna draw an X. If the computer is playing, it's going to draw an O. Okay, and then here I'm just gonna create those variables. So this is the instance variables here. So X and Y, and then self.text is equals to text. Okay, now we're only gonna have one function in here to draw those icons into the screen, because they're just a text and we just need to get the coordinates right and then see which one we're placing, either X or Y, X or O. And for that we're just gonna create a simple font in Pygame. Okay, so if you've seen my other videos, you know how I do this. So I just literally create a font variable, pygame.font.sysfont. I always use consolas, and we're going to be using a font size of 70. You can increase the size, you can decrease that. If you make your screen bigger, you should increase that size. Okay, and then text variable is a font, that variable that we just create there, dot render, and then we're going to pass in the self.text, and then true for anti-alias to round the corners, and then the color is white. And then we're gonna have a font size variable, which is font.size self.text. Okay, so just to get that font size, you're gonna see in a second now, because now we're gonna have two variables in here for the coordinates where we want to draw the fonts or the icon into the screen, because we don't want to draw the icon. So let me show in here. If I run this, you see, imagine this is a square. Okay, so that's the tile here. And if we click on the middle, we need to add the X into the center of this tile. So we don't want to add to the top corner. We don't want to use that, the X and Y of the tile. We need to take that X and Y and then add some more values to make that X or the O into the center of this tile. Okay, so yeah, just a little bit of math in here. We're going to create these two variables. So draw X, which is self.x plus, because the X and Y which we're going to be passing here is the tile X and Y basically. Okay, so plus tile size divided by 2 minus the font size 0, which, so the font size here, it returns a tuple which has the width and the height of the font. We're taking the first argument, the first element of that tuple, which is the width, that divided by 2. Okay, and then we're just gonna press Command or Control D to duplicate this. Draw Y, self.y, tile size is the same, font size in this case you're gonna be using 1 because we need the height, and divided by 2. And then we just take that and we blit to the screen. Okay, so we take the text and we blitz it into the draw X and draw Y. Alright, that is all for this icon class. Okay, now let's go back into the main file, and we created board in here. Let's create this function Let's first create this variable in here, which will decide who is going to start, if it's the player or if it's the computer. I'm just going to create a simple variable, self.player turn is going to be equals to, if it's true, then it's my turn, and if it's false, it's the computer turn. So we're going to be changing that in the middle of the game. So every time I play, then this is gonna become false because it's not my turn anymore, it's the computer. Every time the computer play, then this will turn into true. Okay, so this is just, I'm gonna initialize that. You can either start this as true or false if you like. So if you want you always starting, then you just initialize this as true. If you're on the computer or starting, just initialize that as false. I will randomize that. Okay, and to do that, so you know that you can also use numbers in here for true or false. So 0 would be false, 1 would be true. So that's what I'm going to be using here. I'm just going to use a random.random 0 and 1. So it's basically just gonna randomize. It's gonna pick one, either 0 or 1, or it's gonna take an integer between 0 and 1, and between 0 and 1 there's only two integers, which is 0 and 1. Okay, and that is going to define if it's either true or false, and then that will randomize who is starting the game. Now let's create this function which will draw the icons. Okay, you could potentially write this function or write this code straight away into the draw function, but I like to have a bit more organized, so I'm just gonna put that into a function first, and then I will call that function into the draw function. Okay, so define draw icons. We don't need any parameters in there. This simple for loop for row and for I and row in enumerate, we're gonna do a enumerate self.board.board list. So we're calling the self.board object, and we're taking the board list. And then what the enumerate does, basically it takes the index and the element and saves it into these two variables. Okay, so we're going to be using the index and the element, and then just a nested for loop in here for j and icon in enumerate self.board.board list. Sorry, actually this we can just do self.row because we have the row in there. Okay, so it's just a bit easier. And then in here again, we're just gonna call this x and y equals to board pixel, and we're gonna pass in here j and I. Okay, so make sure that it's in this order, j and I, not the other way around, because otherwise it's gonna be inversed. So we're just passing that I and j, or j and I, to get to a pixel coordinates, and then we're going to be adding an icon into this x and y coordinates, and also the actual icon in here. Okay, so in that boards list we're going to have multiple elements, which is their x or o's, and then whichever is that one is going to be drawn into the screen, and then we just call our draw function from the icon self.screen. Okay, and then we just literally call this function here, so self.draw icons. Okay, right now if you run this, you're not gonna see any difference. You can't collect, we haven't done any events yet, but if you come back in here into your sprites and you go into the class boards list, okay, I'm just gonna make one change in here. So we create the board like that. I'm just gonna append a letter to, for example, 0, 0. So the top left of the board, we're gonna append an X to it. Okay, if I come back in here to the main and I run this, then you see you have the X in there. Okay, if we change this to an O, for example, come back in here, you run it, you have that O in there. So this is working fine, and the letters are blitzing in the center of that tile as well. So this is all good. This is good news. So this is just for testing. You can delete this now. Okay, so the next thing to do now is to do the events. So to check whether we're clicking with the mouse or not. Down here in this events function, we're going to create another if statement in here. So for event type equals pygame dot mouse button down. So that means we're going to be checking when we click on the mouse button. It's going to be either of the mouse button actually. And we'll check if self.player turn. Okay, so now we'll see. So if it's our turn, because the computer is not going to be clicking on the screen, obviously it's just the user, it's just the player is going to be clicking on the screen. So if it's my turn, then we'll take mouse X mouse Y. It's going to be equals to pygame.mouse.getPosition. This getPosition function returns a tuple, okay, which contains the X and Y coordinates of the mouse whenever we click down. It's going to record that coordinates, and we're just going to send that to these two variables called mouse X, mouse Y. And then we're also going to create two variables in here for the row and the column, and we're going to call the boards.isClicked function. And if you guess right, we're going to pass in the mouse X and the mouse Y inside of it. Okay, so remember this isClick function is going to either return a row and a column for us to use, or it's going to return none and none. Okay, and that is going to be saved into this row and column variable. Now is what we're going to be checking here. So if the row is not none, okay, then we'll have to move, or we'll have to add the icon to the board. Okay, so I'm just gonna pass this in here because it's gonna be another function in here. We can actually create this function probably right now as well. Let's go, let's just go to the top here after the update. So here we're gonna define a function called move, and we're gonna pass in the row and the column. I'm not gonna write this code down here. First, because I like writing code in other functions and then calling functions instead of having like a bunch of code in one function. And also because we're gonna be using the same move function for the computer. So whenever the computer decides a space that wants to place the icon, we're gonna be calling this move function for the computer as well. So inside of here, we first need to check whether it's the player turn or not. So if it's the player turn, we'll call self.boards board list, and we're just gonna add into the row and the column a X. Okay, and then else, if it's not the player turn, that means it's the computer turn. We'll do the same thing. Self.boards list row column, we insert into that position, and then we add an O instead of an X. Okay, and then we just do self.playerTurn equals not self.playerTurn. Player turn. Okay, so what this is doing, if it's my turn, it's gonna go inside here, it's going to add an X, and then it's gonna skip this obviously, and it's gonna do self.playerTurn, which is true, not self.playerTurn, which is gonna become false. So now is the computer turn. Now is the computer turn. It's not gonna go through this, it's gonna go to the else, it's gonna place the O. Now this player turn is false, and then we say not false, which becomes true, and then it's our turn. So every time we run this function here, it will invert the player turn. Okay, now let's just let's call this move function down here. So self.move, we pass in the row and the column. Let's run this and see what happens. So if I click, okay, yeah, I can only click once because now it's not my turn anymore. Okay, so but let's do a few tests. So if I click, okay, so now it's the computer turn because of this. I'm just gonna change this to 1, so we always start, just for testing now. Okay, so if I click again somewhere else, okay, so it's working. Okay, all of them should be working fine. Let me just, I will just put this back to random. Now let's create the AI, so the simple AI, the one that is just gonna it's gonna randomize where it plays. It just doesn't know what it's doing. It's just for us to test, because the smart AI is gonna take a little bit more time to code. So we're going to just under move here. Let's just create a function called dumb AI. Okay. And then in here, what we're gonna do is we're just gonna have a while loop that will select random places in the board, and we're gonna keep doing that until it selects a space that is valid or a space that is empty. Okay. So in here, we're just gonna do while true x. We're gonna create two variables, x and y, for the coordinates that we want to place the AI. X equals to random.randent, and we need to go from 0 to the length of self.boards list. We need to do -1 in here. Okay, and then let's just command or control D to duplicate that and change this to an X, and that's gonna be the same random.randent. Now we do if self.boards list x y equals to empty. So if that's empty, then we just return x and y. Okay, so if this is not empty, then we're not going to return that. We're going to keep going on this while loop, and we're going to generate another random integer until that is empty and it's valid and we can place it. Okay, so to test this, let's just go into the update function up here, and let's just do this update function here and call the dump AI. So we're gonna have one long if statement in here. So if not self.player turn, that means it's not our turn, it's the AI turn, and not self.board.isBoard full. So the board is not full. Okay, we can still play. We are going to do row column equals to self.dump AI. See, so this function here returns an x and y. We're just gonna save that x and y into this row and column, and then in here we are calling the self.move, if you guessed. Okay, and that is gonna do this. So it's gonna check it's not the player turn, it's the computer, so it's gonna place an O instead of an X. Okay, and then it's gonna change that back. Let's test this and see what happens. Okay, so the computer started there. I'm gonna place in here. Computer placed in there. I'm gonna place in here. Okay, computer placed in there. I'm gonna place in there. Computer placed in here. I'm gonna place in here. Okay, I didn't win because we haven't done the winning check yet. Let's try this again. Okay, so it's working fine. Every time I place, the AI placed in a random place, in a random location, and then I place back in. Okay, so I'm gonna be ending this part 2 here, and I hope you guys understood all the codes. Let me know in the comments below if you have any question, and I'll check them out and I'll answer back to you. Okay, so I'll see you guys on part 3.